In a quiet Montana town where sprawling ranches stretch beneath endless skies and dirt roads wind through fields of golden wheat, a chilling rumor began to stir. It wasn't about crop failures or the harsh winters that often swept through the plains. No, this whisper was far stranger, centered on a young woman named Juniper. She was known for her beauty, her gentle demeanor, and her uncanny connection to the horses on her family's ranch. But now, the townsfolk were talking about her growing belly, about the way it seemed to swell too quickly, too unnaturally. What was the truth behind Juniper's condition? Was it a miracle, a curse, or something else entirely? The answer would unravel a story that no one in this small community could have foreseen. Juniper had grown up on her family's horse ranch, a sprawling property nestled in the rolling hills of Montana. From a young age, she'd been drawn to the animals, especially Midnight, a towering black stallion with a glossy coat and soulful eyes. Her parents, who had spent their lives breeding horses for local fairs and tourist rides, taught her everything they knew. When they passed away unexpectedly in a car accident, the ranch became hers, along with the weight of its legacy. She wasn't alone, though. She had Everett, her husband of 3 years, a hard-working man who loved her deeply. Everett was a farmer at heart, more comfortable tending to the wheat fields than in the stables, but he supported Juniper's passion, even if he didn't share it. Their life together was simple but fulfilling. Each morning, Everett would head to the fields, his hands calloused from years of labor, while Juniper spent her days in the stable, brushing Midnight's coat, whispering to him as if he understood her every word. The stallion was her confidant, her anchor, especially after her parents' death. To the townsfolk, Juniper was an enigma, beautiful, reserved, and fiercely devoted to her horses. But recently, something had changed. Juniper's belly had begun to grow, and it wasn't long before the whispers started. At first, the townsfolk assumed it was good news. "Juniper's expecting," they'd say, offering congratulations at the local diner or the farmer's market. But Juniper's responses were vague, her smiles fleeting. She'd laugh off their questions, saying, "Oh, it's too early to talk about," or change the subject entirely. The townsfolk began to notice how quickly her belly was growing, far faster than seemed normal. "She's barely 3 months along, and she looks ready to pop," one woman remarked at the market. "Twins, maybe," another suggested. But doubts crept in. "No one's belly gets that big that fast," a skeptical voice muttered. The rumors took a darker turn at the local bar, where men gathered over beers after long days in the fields. "You ever notice how she's always with that horse?" one man said, his tone half joking but laced with suspicion. "Spends more time with that stallion than her own husband."
Another laukhet, wat if it ain't Everett's kid?
The words were meant as a crude jest, but they stuck, spreading like wildfire through the town. By the time the rumor reached the women's knitting circle, it had morphed into something grotesque. "I heard she's carrying something unnatural," one woman whispered, her needles pausing. "Like what? A foal?" Another scoffed, but the idea lingered, fueled by Juniper's reclusive nature and the town's penchant for gossip. Everett, for his part, tried to ignore the chatter. He was a practical man, focused on keeping the ranch running and supporting his wife. But the rumors found him too. One morning at the feed store, an old farmer pulled him aside. "Everett, I don't mean no harm, but folks are talkin'. They say Juniper's belly ain't right. That it's not yours." Everett's face darkened, his hands tightening around the bag of grain he was holding. "Who's sayin' that?" he demanded, his voice low. The farmer shrugged uncomfortably. "Just talk, you know how people are. But she's always with that horse, and folks notice." The words gnawed at Everett, planting seeds of doubt he hated himself for feeling. He loved Juniper, trusted her completely, but the speed of her pregnancy was undeniable. He'd seen her belly grow almost overnight, stretching her clothes to the point where she'd taken to wearing loose flannel shirts. She avoided doctors, brushing off his suggestions to get checked with a nervous laugh.
I'm fine, Everett.
It's just twins probably, she'd say, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. One evening, unable to stand the uncertainty any longer, Everett confronted her. He found her, as always, in the stable, brushing Midnight's mane under the soft glow of a lantern. The stallion stood still, his dark eyes fixed on Everett as he approached. "Juniper, we need to talk," Everett said, his voice firm but trembling. She turned, her hand still on Midnight's flank, and offered a small smile.
"What's wrong? You look so serious."
"It's about the baby," he said, stepping closer.
"Oh babies. Whatever's going on?"
"You're not telling me something, Juniper. You've been dodging my questions, and now the whole damn town's talking. They're saying crazy things about you and Midnight." His voice cracked on the last word, the absurdity of it hitting him even as he spoke. Juniper's smile faded, her hand dropping from the horse. "What are they saying?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. Everett hesitated, then pushed forward. "They're saying it's not normal. That your belly's too big, too fast. That maybe it's not human." He regretted the words as soon as they left his mouth, but it was too late. Juniper's face paled, her eyes wide with hurt. "You believe them?" she whispered.
"You think it got, Everett, you know me."
"I don't know what to think," he snapped, his frustration boiling over. "You won't go to the doctor, you won't talk to me, and you spend all your time out here with him." He gestured at Midnight, who snorted and stepped forward, positioning himself between Juniper and Everett as if sensing the tension. Everett stared at the horse, then back at his wife, his chest tight with a mix of anger and guilt.
"Just tell me the truth, Juniper. Please."
She looked down, her hands resting on her belly. "I don't know what's happening," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "It's growing too fast, and I'm scared. But I swear, Everett, it's ours. I'd never," she trailed off, tears welling in her eyes. "I just need you to trust me." Everett wanted to believe her, but the rumors, her secrecy, and the unnatural speed of her pregnancy were tearing at his resolve. As he walked back to the house, leaving Juniper in the stable, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong, not just with her pregnancy, but with the life they'd built together. The days that followed were heavy with tension. Juniper tried to act normal, tending to Midnight and helping with small chores around the ranch, but her growing belly made every task exhausting. She was tired all the time, her back aching, her breaths shallow. Everett watched her closely, torn between love and suspicion. He hated himself for doubting her, but the rumors were relentless, seeping into every corner of their small town. At the local diner, he overheard whispers about Juniper's monster baby, and at the gas station, a group of teenagers snickered as they passed him, one muttering, "Wonder if it'll come out neighing." Juniper felt the weight of the town's judgment too. When she went to the market, women who once greeted her warmly now avoided her eyes, their conversations halting as she approached. She heard the whispers freakish, unnatural, that horse of hers, and each word cut deeper than the last. She stopped going into town, retreating to the ranch where Midnight was her only solace. The stallion seemed to sense her distress, nuzzling her gently as she leaned against him, her tears soaking into his mane. One night, unable to bear the strain any longer, Everett sat Juniper down at their kitchen table, a single bulb casting harsh shadows across the room. "We're going to the hospital tomorrow," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This isn't just about you anymore, Juniper. It's about our kids. If something's wrong, we need to know." Juniper nodded, her hands trembling as she clasped them over her belly. "Okay," she whispered. "But I'm scared, Everett. What if they find something bad?" "Then we'll face it together," he said, reaching for her hand. "But we can't keep pretending everything's fine." The next morning, they drove to the hospital in Billings, a 2-hour trip through winding country roads. Juniper stared out the window, her hands resting on her belly, while Everett gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. When they arrived, Dr. Clara Hayes, a kind but no-nonsense obstetrician, greeted them. She reviewed Juniper's chart, her brow furrowing as she noted the rapid progression of the pregnancy. "Let's do an ultrasound," she said, leading them to an exam room. The ultrasound room was cold and sterile, the hum of the machine filling the silence. As Dr. Hayes moved the wand over Juniper's belly, the screen flickered to life, revealing 2 tiny shapes twins, just as Juniper had suspected. Everett let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, his eyes fixed on the screen. But Dr.
Hayes Expression Gracious.
She adjusted the wand, her movements deliberate, then froze. "There's something else," she said, her voice measured. "Juniper, your uterus is showing an abnormal growth. It's not the twinsets, something separate."
Everetts Hart sank.
"What kind of growth?" he asked, his voice tight. "It's a mass, Dr.
Hayes Said, turning off the machine.
"Possibly a tumor. It's large, and it's growing at an alarming rate. We need to run more tests to understand what we're dealing with." Juniper's hands tightened on the exam table, her face pale. "Is it dangerous?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper.
Doctor. Hayes met her eyes.
"It could be. If it keeps growing, it might put pressure on your organs, your lungs, even the twins. We need to act quickly." The rest of the day was a blur of blood tests, scans, and hushed conversations with specialists. Everett stayed by Juniper's side, holding her hand through every procedure, but his mind raced with fear. A tumor? How had this gone unnoticed? And why was it growing so fast? When they finally sat down with Dr. Hayes again, the news was grim. "The mass is aggressive," she said, her voice steady but heavy. "It's likely a uterine tumor, and it's complicating the pregnancy. The safest option would be to remove it now, but that would mean terminating the pregnancy." Juniper's breath caught, her hands flying to her belly. "No," she said, her voice firm despite the tears in her eyes.
"I won't lose my babies."
"Juniper, Doctor," Hayes said gently, "I understand how hard this is. But if we don't act, the tumor could endanger your life. And if it grows too large, it could make delivery impossible." Everett squeezed her hand, his voice breaking. "What if we wait? Can we monitor it, keep the pregnancy going?" "Doctor." Hayes hesitated. "We can try, but it's risky. The tumor is already putting strain on Juniper's body. We'd need to watch it closely, and if it gets worse, we may have no choice but to operate." Juniper looked at Everett, her eyes pleading. "I want to keep them, Everett. I can do this. I know I can." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Okay. We'll do whatever it takes." As they drove back to the ranch, the weight of the diagnosis hung between them. Juniper stared out the window, her hand resting on her belly, while Everett tried to focus on the road. When they reached the ranch, Juniper went straight to the stable, where Midnight was waiting. She pressed her forehead against his, whispering, "We're gonna make it, aren't we?" The stallion snorted softly, as if in agreement, and for the first time that day, Juniper felt a flicker of hope. The weeks that followed were a test of endurance. Juniper and Everett returned to the hospital every week for scans and tests, each visit a reminder of the delicate balance they were trying to maintain. The tumor was growing, pressing against Juniper's organs and making it harder for her to breathe or move. She was exhausted, her body aching constantly, but she refused to give up. "I'm doing this for them," she'd say, her hand on her belly, her voice steady despite the pain. Everett was her rock, though he was crumbling inside. He watched her weaken with each passing day, her once vibrant energy replaced by a quiet determination. He took on more of the ranch work, tending to the fields and the horses while Juniper rested. But the rumors in town only grew worse. Someone had snapped a photo of Juniper leaving the ranch one morning, her belly impossibly large, and posted it online with a cruel caption, "What's she carrying in there? A calf." The post went viral in their small community, drawing hundreds of comments, each more vicious than the last. "Bet it's that horse's kid," one read. "Poor Everett, stuck with a freak," said another. Juniper saw the comments one night, scrolling through her phone while Everett was out checking the fences. The words cut deep, each one a dagger to her heart. She threw the phone down, tears streaming down her face. When Everett returned and saw her, he was furious. "Who's doing this?" he demanded, grabbing the phone and scanning the comments. His face reddened with rage. "They don't know you, Juniper.
They don't know what you're going through."
"It doesn't matter," she said, wiping her eyes. "They can say what they want.
I know the truth."
But Everett couldn't let it go. The next morning, he stormed into the local diner, where a group of men were laughing over coffee, their conversation turning to Juniper as soon as they saw him.
"You think this is funny?"
Everett shouted, his voice echoing through the small room. "My wife's fighting for her life, for our kids, and you're sitting here making up lies?" The men fell silent, their faces flushed with shame. "You don't know what it's like to protect your family," Everett continued, his voice breaking. "So keep her name out of your mouths." The confrontation quieted the gossip for a while, but the damage was done. Juniper withdrew further, spending most of her time in the stable with Midnight. The horse seemed to sense her pain, standing close as she leaned against him, her breaths labored. "You're the only one who doesn't judge me," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Midnight nickered softly, his warmth a small comfort in the storm of her life. By the 6th month, Juniper's condition was critical. She could barely walk, her belly so large it seemed impossible for her slight frame to carry it.
"Doctor."
Hayes insisted she be admitted to the hospital for constant monitoring. "We can't wait any longer," she said. "The tumor is putting too much pressure on your body. If we don't act soon, we could lose you and the babies." Juniper agreed, though the decision terrified her. As Everett helped her into the car, she turned to Midnight, who was pacing restlessly by the stable gate. "I'll be back," she whispered, her voice trembling. The stallion snorted, his eyes fixed on her as if he understood. In the hospital, time slowed to a crawl. Juniper was confined to a bed, hooked up to monitors that tracked her vitals and the twins' heartbeats. Each day brought new pain, her body struggling under the weight of the tumor and the pregnancy. Everett stayed by her side, reading to her, holding her hand, and whispering words of encouragement. But the fear was always there, lurking in the quiet moments when the machines beeped and the nurses exchanged worried glances. One night, the pain became unbearable. Juniper woke with a cry, her hands clutching her belly as waves of agony tore through her. Everett hit the call button, his heart racing as nurses rushed in. "She's in distress," one shouted, checking the monitors.
"Doctor."
Hayes arrived moments later, her face grim.
"The tumor's causing complications.
We need to operate now." Juniper was wheeled into surgery, her breaths shallow, her eyes wide with fear. Everett tried to follow, but a nurse stopped him at the door. "Save her," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "Please." As the doors closed, he sank into a chair, his hands shaking, praying for the first time in years. The operating room was a whirlwind of controlled chaos.
"Doctor."
Hayes and her team worked with precision, their faces tense behind their masks. Juniper was under general anesthesia, her body still as the surgeons made the first incision. Blood pooled instantly, more than they'd expected, and the nurses worked quickly to manage it. We need to get the twins out first, Dr. Hayes said, her voice steady. Then we tackle the tumor. The first baby, a girl, was delivered amid a tense silence. Her cry was weak but present, a small victory in the chaos. The nurses whisked her to the neonatal unit, where she was placed in an incubator. The second baby, a boy, was slower to respond. His tiny chest barely moved, and for a moment, the room held its breath. "Come on, Dr. Hayes muttered, massaging his chest gently.
After wat felt like an eternity, a fin CY brokse silence.
The boy was alive, but like his sister, he was fragile, his survival uncertain. But the fight wasn't over. Juniper's vitals were dropping, her heart rate erratic. "We're losing her," a nurse called, her voice sharp with urgency. The tumor, larger than the scans had shown, was bleeding heavily, complicating the surgery.
Doctor.
Hayes worked tirelessly, her hands steady despite the mounting pressure. "We need to stabilize her now, or we won't get another chance," she said, directing the team to control the bleeding. Outside, Everett sat in the waiting room, his world reduced to the ticking of the clock and the distant hum of hospital machinery. He couldn't shake the image of Juniper's pale face as she was wheeled away, her hand slipping from his. He'd faced loss before his parents, his brother, but nothing compared to the terror of losing her. He closed his eyes, whispering, "Please, Juniper. Fight." Hours later, Dr. Hayes emerged, her face weary but relieved. "She's stable," she said, placing a hand on Everett's shoulder. "The twins are in the NICU, and they're fighting. Juniper lost a lot of blood, but we removed the tumor. She's not out of the woods yet, but she's a fighter." Everett's legs nearly gave out, relief flooding through him. "Can I see them?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "The babies, yes, Dr. Hayes said. Juniper's still unconscious, but you can sit with her soon." In the NICU, Everett stood before two tiny incubators, his heart swelling and breaking at the sight of his children. The girl, whom they'd name Violet, twitched her tiny fingers, as if reaching for him. The boy, Daniel, was stiller, his breaths shallow but steady. "I'm your dad," Everett whispered, his voice cracking.
"Your mom's gonna be okay. We're gonna be okay."
Juniper woke 4 days later, her body aching but alive. The hospital room was quiet, save for the soft beeping of the monitors. Everett was at her side, his eyes red from sleepless nights. "You're back," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he took her hand.
"You scared the hell out of me. The babies?"
Juniper asked, her voice weak. "They're fighters, just like you," Everett said, a tear escaping.
"Violet and Daniel.
They're in the NICU, but they're hanging in there." Juniper's eyes filled with tears, a mix of relief and longing. The next day, with the help of a nurse, she was wheeled to the NICU. Seeing her twins for the first time, so small and fragile in their incubators, broke her heart and filled it all at once. "I'm here," she whispered, pressing her hand against Violet's incubator. The baby stirred, her tiny hand twitching as if in response. Daniel was quieter, but his chest rose and fell, a sign of life that gave Juniper hope. The weeks that followed were a blur of hospital visits and slow recovery. Juniper's body was weak from the surgery and blood loss, but she was determined to heal for her children. Everett was her constant support, juggling ranch work with hospital trips, his love for her unwavering despite the strain. The twins grew stronger, Violet first, then Daniel, their tiny bodies fighting against the odds. Back in town, the rumors had quieted, replaced by a mix of guilt and awe. When news of Juniper's surgery and the twins' survival spread, those who had spread cruel gossip fell silent. Some even came to the ranch with apologies, bringing casseroles and cards, but Juniper waved them off. "It doesn't matter now," she'd say, her focus on her family. By the time the twins were strong enough to come home, 2 months after their birth, Juniper was regaining her strength. The day they left the hospital was a celebration, with nurses and doctors who had fought alongside them offering hugs and well wishes. As Everett drove them back to the ranch, Juniper held Violet, while Daniel rested in a car seat beside her. The Montana sky was clear, the air crisp with the promise of spring. When they reached the ranch, Midnight was waiting at the gate, his ears pricked as if he'd sensed their return. Juniper, still weak, managed a smile as she stepped out of the car. "Hey boy," she said, her voice soft. Midnight snorted, nudging her gently, then lowered his head to sniff the babies. "These are my kids," Juniper said, tears in her eyes.
"Your new friends."
Everett watched, his heart full. "He missed you," he said, his arm around her. "We all did." Life at the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Juniper's recovery was slow, requiring ongoing treatment to ensure the tumor didn't return, but she grew stronger each day. She and Everett took turns caring for Violet and Daniel, who were thriving despite their fragile start. The twins' laughter filled the house, a sound that made every hardship worth it. Midnight remained a constant in their lives, a silent guardian who seemed to understand the family's journey. Juniper often brought the twins to the stable, letting them watch as she brushed the stallion's coat. "This is Midnight," she'd say, guiding their tiny hands to touch his soft muzzle. The horse stood patiently, his eyes gentle, as if he knew his role in their story. The town's gossip had faded, replaced by admiration for Juniper's resilience. The cruel comments online were buried under an outpouring of support when Everett shared a photo of their family, Juniper, the twins and Midnight, standing together under a golden Montana sunset. "This is what matters," he wrote. "Love, strength, and family." The post spread far beyond their small town, touching hearts with its message of perseverance. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Juniper sat on the porch, Violet in her arms, Daniel asleep in Everett's. "You ever think about those rumors?" Everett asked, his voice soft. Juniper nodded, her gaze on the horizon. "Sometimes. But they don't matter anymore. We made it, Everett. We've got everything we need right here." He smiled, leaning over to kiss her forehead.
Yeah, wie Donnerstag.
As the stars began to appear, Juniper looked out at the ranch, at Midnight grazing peacefully in the distance, and at the two tiny lives in their arms. She'd faced death, judgment, and fear, but she'd come through it stronger. This was her family, her home, and no rumor could ever take that away.